Hello and welcome back to Logical Magic, Examining Esoterica. Hey guys, today I have kind of a deep subject for us, but a necessary one, and one that everybody throughout the course of their lives, every single person that you meet will deal with this concept at a different point, and it will have to do with different things. For some people, it will have to do with death. For some people, it will have to do with divorce. Some people having a career not work out or a business fail. And the center point of this particular discussion is grief. How to cope with it, how to move past it, how to embrace it so that the process goes more quickly. And to do that, I brought back Rick Paul, who I talked to last year, and I really enjoyed talking to him. He is a spirit medium. He is also a tarot card reader, and he is a thought therapist, which I think is one of the best descriptions ever. And he's somebody that I really vibed with the first time, and I thought he would be the perfect person to bring back for this particular discussion. Hey, Rick, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fine, thank you. We had an off-air discussion there about how strange the energies are being, so I'm keeping upright. It's like a bit like clinging on to things at the moment, but I'm doing my best.
Sometimes it's going to be like that. Sometimes the energies are around you and you can't figure out why. I will tell you that yesterday I had a big uptick in grief from some passings that I thought I had resolved. I couldn't figure out what was causing it, which I am one of those people who really likes to have, like, what was the trigger for this? What was the cause of this? Why am I experiencing this emotion? And I had to accept that sometimes it's just going to be, something from your subconscious. Or part of me knew that we were going to be having this discussion. And so I was dealing with some of the residual grief in my own life, which we all will have it. So let's get the housekeeping out of the way here. So you can find me at therisingmoon.com to book me for a tarot card reading, a life coaching session. I also do some forms of spirit mediumship, but Rick concentrates on that more than I do. You can find me at Chromecast at The Rising Moon and always here at Logical Magic, Examining Esoterica. And I have a Patreon if you would like weekly advice on how to navigate your spiritual healing journey. Rick, where can people find you?
Medium Rick 007 at gmail.com. So that's my website address. Sorry, that is my
Email?
yeah, that'd be the right word. Yeah, my email. Road testing a new set of teeth today, and I do work on Facebook, Rick Paul Spiritual Medium, and Rick Paul Urban Angel, which is what we were going to talk about as well a little bit with the sort of thought therapy. So I'm like you. I like to get into the energies at a deeper level. It's not just all about the mediumship. It's helping people process whatever they're going through. So that's where you can find me.
Yeah, we're going to have a similar approach to how we view being able to do this, when we view it as a gift, it means that it is there to try and aid other people in their journey, particularly in their healing. Because once we have healed our wounds, then we are able to step more into our purpose and also to experience life as a vibrant experience. But we all have pain, we all have difficulty, and we all have struggles that we need to figure out what category to put them in our lives, how to cope with them, what they mean and what they don't mean. And that's why we're talking about grief today, because grief is such a compounded problem within our society. And this is one area where the Victorians had it over us in terms of having a healthier emotional process than we do, is the Victorians had a long period, I think it was 2 years of a minimum, where they would be in deep mourning for the first year and they would wear specific colors to indicate to other people that they were still in mourning. And they really had a process around it that honored it as a long emotional journey. Whereas in the modern day world, particularly following the two world wars, where people had to cope with so much death on a global scale and the Spanish flu, is that it became foreshortened as a societal practice that, you've got 6 weeks where before people expect you to kind of be moving on. And grief does not work like that. And it does not just come from death. But when it comes to losing somebody to death, and by the way, like, trigger warning for people who don't like the word death, that is what I say. I do not say passed on. I don't talk about people being beyond that veil. I think that we need to have a healthier relationship to the idea that something is born and eventually we die. And if we demystify the fear around it, then it is something that we can embrace as a natural part of our spiritual journey, which is not to say rush towards it, but accept it as being a natural thing, that's something that shouldn't be feared. And that if you lose somebody to death, that there is nothing wrong with having a grieving period, a mourning period, that sense of loss that comes from a big hole being ripped in your life, while still understanding that, as Rick and I can tell you as people who can do spirit mediumship, there is something beyond this. So people don't end when they die, but that doesn't lessen mourning, the longing, the need to have that hole in our lives explained, understood, and eventually filled. And if we fill it with healing, it will then become a greater part of our journey. And having experienced grief, we can go on to value the things that are in our life more. But it's hard to view it that way. Rick, you've had some personal experience of late with grief. You lost your dad last autumn, is that correct?
Yeah, last September we got home from a day out at the seaside. Lovely, fantastic day to get a phone call to race over the other side of our estate, which is literally minutes away. And the phone call went, I think your dad's dead, and then got across to the other side of the estate where he was, and he was dead in his chair. And it was a shock, but strangely, and this is what I hope will open up on here, that grief triggers all sorts of emotions. There is no right and wrong way of looking at it. And when I saw him, I went in there, and my first thing was relief,
Mhm.
because he wouldn't be fighting anymore, because my dad's been at war with himself and the lots of his experiences for as long as I can remember now. So when you go in there and it's very, very obvious that he'd gone, I just felt relief that he wouldn't have to go through any pain anymore. But it's what it triggers afterwards that is, for me, there's no hard and fast rule. So it was I don't know about sobering experience, but it was a shock to the system, but not in the way that you would expect.
Um, Often sudden deaths will feel a little bit like being mugged, that it is, you'll have numbness sometimes. One of the things that we need to cover as we're talking about grief, and again, it is not just about losing someone to death. It genuinely, people who have had long-term relationships and have to grieve and mourn the life they thought they were going to live but will not, which is another form of grief. But that it takes many different forms. People don't realize that often grief is a very angry emotion. Sometimes it will come because, how dare you leave me and here I am all alone, that type of thing. People will feel that way sometimes. That it is something to, the first thing in your process of grief, whether it is for a relationship, for a job, or for a person, is to understand that whatever is being brought to you as the emotion is the thing that is right for you. That there is no real wrong way to do this, that it will look different in every person and contain a different balance of emotions, as you spoke to, with the idea that there was a part of you that was relieved. And when my father died when I was 15, and he died very suddenly and very dramatically, and it's like, I won't go into that story because it's actually traumatizing for other people to hear. But I never really mourned him because he was such a difficult human being that everybody around him, and including me, viewed it as, phew, because of the type of person he was. It genuinely was a relief. And for many years, I had compounded guilt around that because what kind of person doesn't even mourn their own father? It's like, well, he abused me pretty badly, and he was a really volatile human being, and he was dangerous as well. And so it took me until my adult years to look at it with that level of introspection and perspective to kind of forgive my, because I thought I was a deeply broken person. It's like, I didn't even grieve my dad. And he was like the only person I lived with at that particular point. I did not live with my mother. Um, and so it can be something that confuses you and introduces you to parts of yourself with, you're not familiar with them. And so it's very common and to need help with that. And one of the things I want to urge people with whatever grief you are coping with, whatever sense of loss, and it can even come from discovering more about the world around you and losing your idealism. Whatever form of grief that you are experiencing, it helps to get somebody else involved in the process, if at all possible. There are grief counseling groups. Rick and I do all kinds of, you call yourself a thought therapist. I am somebody who looks into somebody's subconscious world and helps them understand themselves as well to get a better result in their emotional world. That there are bunches of different professions that will lead you towards a greater understanding of self, which isn't to say that it will take away the process. It is a natural process. It just is. One of the hardest things about being a human being is accepting that our negative emotions have a place. They are not something to be shooed away, compressed, or resented. They're trying to tell you about your depth of feeling for something. And that is why grief while profound, if you are willing to embrace it as a natural part of your human existence and your ability to love, can actually be something that transform your relationship to self and to others in the aftermath. But that we have a tendency to resent it because it feels terrible. And so it feels like, why can't this just be over? Why can't it be over? Because you're not done yet. If you're still experiencing grief, and it can come back years later, you can think you've resolved something, closed a door, there will be something that reminds you, and you will end up crying, or you will end up reminiscing, or you'll end up feeling sad and bereft again. And that's natural and that's normal. And it doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. Grief in the work that you do as well is very common. Rick, can you share some of your perspective on grief and the process with it, please?
Yeah, I can. I agree quite massively with you. But when my dad passed, and similar sort of story to you, that there's lots of things going on in the background that I don't want to open up to people in that sense. But I issued a statement in front of people, and I said 52-year-old me, which is my current age, can accept it, can process it, because it's a natural part of there. And I'm at peace with the fact that I've never resolved what I wanted to resolve, and it wouldn't sort of turn out in a nice way. But then quite equally, I've had experiences up till the age of 52. So you look at 10-year-old me, 15-year-old me, 20-year-old me, who is not at peace with it. Mm-hmm. And the adult that is left behind, that's in charge of all of those emotions, may sometimes have to regress their own energy and go back into that space to do the healing that you need to do. And when I spoke about, when you spoke about the like the grieving of the relationships and things like that, this got me to thinking. This was one of the triggers that when my dad went, one of the triggers that when there's an absolute wealth of information for people who have literally lost somebody to the spirit world, or wherever you believe is past. So there's that expertise about a person going. And I got to thinking, but there isn't a lot of information for somebody who's broken, that's lost a job, lost a career, lost a relationship. And I called it live grieving. Mm-hmm. And then when you combine that with people that have got Alzheimer's, dementia, and things where there's little parts of them passing away every single day, then that's live grieving, because you're grieving in that moment in time as you lose people day by day. And my sense is that if your mind has got nothing to think about, then the subconscious is not really worried about what you fill it with. It will just record what you fill it with. But an active mind like mine, which is thinking constantly all of the time, my mind never switches off. I find it really, really difficult to actually relax my brain. You've got the depth of the feeling of the loss and all of the things that could have been in a live moment. And there isn't a lot of people that focus on that. You know, you've got counselors for this, you've got grief counselors for that, you've got people who will help you rearrange your thoughts. But just in some point in time, there's what I would call the vortex. You talked about triggers. You're sat in that vortex moment where you realize something's come to an end. There will be a new process at some point where you move past, because I don't believe that you ever fully move on from it. I personally think that the grieving journey will go on until the day that I'm either burnt or have my lid screwed down. So I just process it in that given moment, and I try and ask myself this question. So if I'm triggered by something, what age am I? So quite often when I'm 52, I'll be able to manage. I'm not saying I'll get past it, you know, without maybe shedding a tear or getting a little bit upset. But the likelihood is that something in the present moment has been triggered, and then that's got me to look backwards. Mm-hmm. I'm then sat in that vortex moment with all of that in full color, in full 3D energy coming in and around me, and it flattens me. It's an energy for me. And the only way I can describe this to people who haven't experienced it, it's like a heart punch. Mm-hmm. It cracks you right in that solar plexus moment, and you're, oh. Yeah. And all you can truthfully do with it, in my humble opinion, is to just stop and process it. So my father's death was very recent, my father-in-law, who was the total opposite of my dad, who was my absolute hero, I don't think I've ever really begun to process it. So you've got all of this in the live grieving moment, and also to process it in the fact that you're not going to see either of them again. It's a difficult situation with, I don't think, any clear set of answers.
It is such an individual emotion, and that is the first thing to understand, that no matter what is sparking your grief, that the profound energy and feeling within is an indication of how much energy is invested within you in that particular relationship or set of circumstances. And that the very first thing to understand about moving through grief is to not judge it within yourself. If you don't judge it, then you won't fight it. But not judging it is not the same thing as failing to understand it. So you do need to try and understand the depth of your feelings. As I said, as an adult, I was able to look back at that set of circumstances and understand that that was a dangerous and volatile and scary person, and everybody around him was afraid of my father. And that it made perfect sense that the grief of that particular loss didn't resemble what I saw in other people. That in fact, that it had, it really is, to this very day, I have not lost anybody I truly admired and missed. That there have been a lot of difficult people in my life who were lost to death. My grandmother had died as well when I was 12, and she had incredible amounts of cancer. They found it following that house fire that I referred to, that like taught me I'm attached to something. She is the person who accidentally set that fire, and I believe it was accidental. I really do. If she was really trying to kill me, then it was on a subconscious level. Because she had accidentally set a room on fire, then left that and like went to another part of the house so that I was exposed to the fire and she was not. But she was also a very, very heavy drinker. And that it was not surprising that my grief in those losses did not resemble that of other people. And that's the first thing you need to understand, is that we can talk to you about grief and reaching out and understanding and looking through your process to find, no matter what is causing your grief, do not judge it. If it was a breakup of something that you invested a great deal of time in, energy, thought, hopes, or dreams, that's going to cause a profound level of grief. And if the people around you do not understand that, it's not for them to understand, it is for you to understand. But that the most important thing is to not become too lost in it, that if you feel yourself becoming lost in it, if hopelessness, despair, regardless of what the loss is beginning to overtake you, reach out for support. If you have no money to invest in people like Rick and myself, or therapists, or grief groups or anything, then do look online for grief support forums and grief support workshops, because there are free resources available. But that the most important thing to remember, if you are being overtaken by despair in your own grief processing journey, is that reach out. Because that is the thing that gets you out of that gridlocked energy around trying to process a truly overwhelming emotion, no matter what it might be. And again, some grief will have anger in it. Breakups and divorce, there's usually a lot of anger and sometimes an inability to see things from a greater perspective. And that's what help and guidance can help you achieve as well. But there are some things that we need to do when we find ourselves in a grieving process, which is, remember that the more you fight it, the longer it will be. So try to embrace the journey as being part of our feeling experience. And in Buddhism, they believe that, life and suffering go hand in hand. And I actually really do believe that as well, but not in any kind of nihilistic way. It's just that if we want to feel joy, we have to be able to feel despair, because everything has its opposite energy, and that it is the price that we pay to be able to come and have the greater and the more wonderful experiences and sensations, is that we will have these counterbalancing energies and we are likely to experience them. And that it is an experience worth having if it helps you understand yourself better, your relationship to your soul, your relationship to your purpose, your relationship to self, and your ability to heal. That even though a negative emotion might feel bad, it can serve a very positive purpose within a life. Rick, in the work that you do, because you do spirit mediumship as well, how do you feel that the process of spirit mediumship can help the grieving?
Um, I really believe it does, because my whole system is built on energy work. My belief is with energy. And I think when you get a client in front of you and you can visualize energy and you can see certain colors and certain things going off around the aura space, then it's to get them to understand, like you've just said there, about that grieving is an incredible personal journey, but to get in to that person's energy, I get them to imagine certain things. I use a lot of humor, and I know that it's not always appropriate, but I use a lot of humor to get to raise people's vibration. Because if you can bring in aspects of the person that's passed and bring in things there that gives proof to them that there is something beyond what we experience now. And then I get them to imagine that that person's actually stood with them there now in this moment. And my interpretation of energy work and grief is that if you imagine, and you'll have to excuse me with this because I'm going to put my hands in front of my face, that grief, when it's all encompassing, is there right in front of your face. You're living, breathing, and experiencing it.
It's all you can see.
The person that has left this plane is not far away. It's just on a different frequency to what we understand it at this level. So if you can get that person to also imagine that their grief is very, very real, and then ask them to move it to that side, like to move it so that it's in their periphery. Because even though that person's gone and they're suffering from the pain and the loss and all of that sort of thing, their life's still going on. So I get them to sort of reach into how that person would have been here, because I don't work with any darkness or negativity. I don't experience dark souls. So anybody who's coming through from the other side for them is going to bring in upliftment, is going to bring a positive message. And I say, what do you think they would do if they saw you sort of head in hands and a little bit flat and anything? And every time this happens, and I ask the question myself, I can just imagine this pair of size 11s kicking somebody up the bum as they're going down the road. So you just say to them, right, one of the worst things I ever heard when I was in therapy about something was put the past behind you. And I felt so insulted by it, because if you're a literal person and somebody says to you, oh, well, it's part of life, put it behind you. And if you're literal, you do that. But that's energy that you put there. So as soon as you get a trigger, you look at it. Yeah. Whereas if you've got it here in your peripheral, it's still real. We're not setting it on a timeline to say that you're going to go towards any healing or completion or anything like that. It's a very, very real part. And when you mentioned about seeking support and guidance for it, that's all I advise. And when I sit with them and I'm doing the mediumship readings, I say, well, sit with that energy. If it's on a normal everyday level and you're coping reasonably well and things are going along quite smoothly, shall we say, then remember all of the positive stuff that you had. Think about all of the positive memories, all the laughs you had, and the things that raise your vibration and raise your spirit. And here's the other part of it. On the days where you're feeling flatter or you're feeling lower, you're feeling in that moment, like you said there, absolutely bang on, and I would agree with this 100%. Don't fight it, but don't spend more than a day being in it. So look to that, right, okay, so some days it does beat us down, and I'm one, I feel like I'm a really strong character, but there are days where I just can't face my everyday circumstances because that longing and that pain, because essentially what we want to happen is to just for 5 minutes to have a conversation with that person that's gone. If we loved them, it's not going to change the emotion because they're gone. So we want 5 minutes. That's what the heart wants. The logical head realizes that that isn't possible. So somewhere in the middle, we've got to get that realization that it's feelings from now on. It's what we've got, where there's the logical side of things. We can't always have what we want. That's the facts of life. So when I connect in with mediumship, I don't sort of cheapen it or say I'm a magician or anything like that, but I bring in aspects of that person's soul. And the idea for me is to get that person just lifting their vibration a little bit and connecting in and having good memories. I'm not going to sit there and try and restructure bad memories or anything like that, or provide counselling in that sense, because again, that's an incredibly personal journey. But it's to just reinforce that whatever we believe as spiritual people, that there is a life beyond. So my spiritual mediumship is very, very important to me. It's not a magic trick. It's not done something as a performance. This is why I always overrun when I'm doing appointments, because if I come in with something and I find that it's really important to that client, I'm afraid linear time goes out the window for me, because I care about that person's energy. So my mediumship is, I just view myself quite simply as a conduit, nothing more, nothing less. So I imagine it like there's a program over here called Catchphrase, and the catch line for it is say what you see. So in my mind's eye, that's what I bring through. Don't judge it. Don't try and put it in any place. Just go, this is what I've got, and this is what they're bringing in for you. And I love it. And I hope that comes across really well. So passionate about working with energy.
It genuinely is an honor to be able to do any of this work that helps people alleviate their own burdens. And you had touched upon something that I want to circle back to, which is the concept of leaving the past behind. Now, the saying is that the past is memory, the future is imagination, and all we have is the present moment. And that's a very reductive way of looking at things, because the past contains your answers to who you are in the present. If you will look at your past and understand what went into pouring your foundation and structuring you, it gives you a greater understanding of self so that you can understand and fully appreciate the present moment. And that's the role of the past for me. So whenever people are talking about leave the past behind, it's understand it and then put it in the appropriate place, and understand that there will be sets of circumstances that will bring that past back to you no matter how much work you've done, because it went into the integral parts of your emotional response system, which is when we're talking about grief, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the building blocks of our emotional response. Grief, anger, sorrow, rage, these are all these very basic primary color emotions, but that's not the only thing that they contain. Grief can have a sense of disappointment in it. It can have a sense of anger in it. It is very common for depression to manifest with anger as well. To remember that the first order of business whenever we're looking at our emotional world is to understand it is truly complex, and that not only can more than one thing be true at once, it is in our emotional response system, because we are complex beings and our emotional process is complex. And things that Rick does and I do, they can help you sort that complexity into categories that you can look at and then understand better, so that when you put the past beside you instead of behind you, that when something comes up, you know how to understand what it is bringing back into your emotional response system. But when it comes to things like other people judging your grief, I agree with you that it is important to recognize processing as a necessary point, but that to understand there is a point of wallowing where you're not resolving anything, you're just stuck in your feelings. And I'm not judging that part. I'm just saying, if you're in that space, go towards more understanding, because that's what it will get. And you also have to be able to step outside yourself and be like, listen, I know this is the worst thing. It feels the worst. It feels like there's no hope and there is no light here. But it's not going to get any better if we stay in this dark room and cry and watch the weepiest film we've ever seen forever. Let's put a cap on that for, I say 72 hours, because I think that there's a lot of people, there's too much pressure on people to rush through negative emotions. So 72 hours is my, whenever you really need to do it, close out the world, really be in your feelings. But at the end of that, eat something healthy, go for a walk, get in touch with a person, even if it's online, even if it's that online support group that I talked about, no matter what loss you're grieving. If it's your job, if it's, your degree didn't work out, there can be, don't let other people judge the magnitude of your loss in your grief. If you feel it, it's real. But we have to recognize that there can come a point of just kind of circling the drain with those feelings over and over again and being in a repeating energy signature. And that awareness and understanding are the things that can help you break out of that. That it can be perfectly natural for years after a loss, a significant loss, for the emotions to come back and to rise up again. And instead of saying, why is that there? Why aren't I over that? Why am I not leaving the past behind? Remember, that is a flag within you, your own red flag system to say, you need to take better care of me. You're not paying enough attention to my emotional world in here. I'm your subconscious talking to you. And the reason that that came up without your permission is your subconscious mind processed something that you were trying to ignore because you don't want to feel bad. And that is absolutely natural and normal, but we can't resolve something if we won't look at it. So having that time period where you allow yourself to feel your feelings is important. being your own best friend in the choices that you make. Now, this is not a client. This is somebody who I've known for years who has she has a personality disorder. I'm not going to go into her backstory at all, but she lost a parent. And every single month at the anniversary of her parents' death, she goes to her parents' grave and has like tea and lies on the grave and cries. And last month, there were a bunch of people around, and so she couldn't comfortably do that. And I did not say this to her, but I really felt like that was the universe trying to help you break a pattern that is making it worse. Because this ritual that she had developed to, like, basically really, really be in her feelings was not helping her process and release them, which is what processing is to understand it, to feel it, to not fear your own feeling, but to understand that you're really seeking to alleviate those feelings in a healthy manner. And spirit mediums can help, readings can help, therapists can help. But if these are beyond your means, then you have to be the person who's a little bit your own best friend. Don't think of it as being a drill sergeant. Think of it as you are stepping outside of yourself and looking at yourself as your very best friend. Or as I was looking at my friend, and I didn't say it because I do know she's had a lot of struggles, is that like maybe that's not the best ritual to engage in. It does not appear to be making you feel better. Is there something else that you could do instead? Could you maybe do it every other month, and on the intervening months instead sit at home and go through happy memories and try to remember what was why you're missing this person, instead of being like, I am sad, I am sad, I am sad, I am sad, I am sad. Why are you sad? Is it because you miss their support, their love, their humor? If you start understanding your loss, it's like removing layers. It comes off in layers, and that you have to have some patience with your process because it does feel rotten. It just doesn't feel good. We all want it over with quickly. But if it's over with too quickly in that 6 week societal window that we've assigned people, it's like, oh, your 3 children died in a terrible car crash. I am not being glib. This kind of thing really happens to people. Move on. Moving on without true understanding of what the injury is means that you're walking around in need of healing for that injury. But that healing is not meant to be done 24/7 in a linear path. You have to take breaks, guys. If you are dealing with a long-term loss, understand that there are meant to be peaks and valleys in this, and that you'll have good days and you'll have bad days. As Rick and I, before we got on here, we had a little bit of a chat before we started. We're talking about is like there is something just funky about the energy right now. And I'm going to name the date. It's what is it? It's Wednesday, June 12th. So if anybody is wondering about like what date you're talking about, pretty much from the 9th on was just like who screwed up the energy vortex in this world? Because if it could go wrong, it did go wrong. There was a lot of like anger and sadness in people around me as well. And that will happen as well. That will happen as well. And do you know what it was? It was the anniversary of D-Day, had brought up a lot of if the people around you are confronting a lot of grief and mourning and upset, the energy around you has changed, and you can be sensitive to that. And that might be your trigger, is don't think that you need to have this rational explanation for everything. And I do that to myself because I'm like, practically Dr. Spock over here. I want a rational explanation for every damn feeling I have. But the reality is that feelings by their actual definition are not rational. They are something that comes from our emotional world, that they will have ebbs, they will have flows, and that to try and be understanding of your process, but also in charge of trying to keep it on a healthy track, because you don't deserve to feel that sad for the rest of all time. Rick, any thoughts that you want to share on what people can do to, like, what are your thoughts on grief, how it manifests, and what people can do about it?
I think, yeah, like when I do my analytical hypnotherapy and I take people back into certain parts of their life, I get them to imagine that they've imprisoned parts of their life in their past moments, and I take them on a journey to release that person there. And when I ask people basic questions, because I am not an intelligent guy, so I don't get like too methodical with things. I go a lot with feelings. So I say, just imagine that you went into a secure room somewhere and there was a version of yourself at a younger age without the knowledge that you've gained over the course of your life. You see somebody laid on the floor there in the fetal position, in a place where they're in tears, they're really, really upset, they're gulping for breath because they can't control their emotions. I'm going to put you into that room and I'm going to stand there as your bodyguard. Then I'm going to ask you to just react how you would have liked to reacted at that point, what you would have needed. So imagine that you've been through some sort of trauma when you was younger, that you've been misunderstood, or somebody's left you all of a sudden, or you've been abandoned, or something like that, where you literally felt like you couldn't cope, your heart was going to burst out of your chest. What did you want in that moment? And every time you lead somebody down that journey, you go, what would you do if you saw anybody, let alone yourself, in that state of emotional distress? Well, I'd ask them if they're okay. Right. Well, ask them if they're okay. I'd ask them if I can do anything to help. We'll do something to help then. Speak to them in a calm manner. Bring their energy down so that they can actually cope. Change the immediate state of behavior around them. Offer support. Offer guidance. And here's the key thing to dealing with those moments where you get overwhelmed by it, is saying that this moment, like every other one that you've experienced in your life, will pass. Right? What did you gain from the thought that you had? What was that emotion telling you? And most people realize that this world is in such a rush to swipe to the next thing that they don't take the time out to actually do the work that's needed. So it is that individual journey. So I always get people to imagine, how would you best respond to a task? Would you respond really well if somebody shouted and bawled at you and told you that you were useless and you should be doing it at a quicker pace and what's the matter with you? I've never heard anybody say yes, that's what's motivating. So what would you like? Well, compassion, understanding, maybe a little bit of time, just a shoulder to lean on. And I went, what do you think that you need right at this moment in time? And it is amazing to watch that revelation coming in, because it is simple, but because we've got all of this external stimulation, we often forget about our own basic needs. You and I both know that the price of being an empath is absolutely huge. It drains your energy, but it's a task that we're willing to take on. But if you're out there and you don't realize that you're an empath, then it's worth taking time out just to sit and consider how much energy it's taken out of you. And one thing I will pick up on when you talk about the past, this is just my thoughts with it. The past, I'm not so sure that it exists, right? I feel that it's something there, that it's a collection of memories that we've agreed are factual. Mm-hmm. So it's a reference point for all of the things that you experience as you go forward. So how did you first react to the first loss? Mm-hmm. How did you react to that sort of stimulation of negativity and blocks and things like that? And then you've got a reference library there, and that's where the healing starts. So for me, the healing journey is ongoing, but open communication on the days that you don't feel like getting in there. Don't get bogged down. Don't feel like, when you said circling the drain, what a description that is. I was like, yes, that is such a great way of describing it. Don't circle the drain. Sometimes you might just need to hit the pause button, right? And do your best, whether you go on meditation, whether you go outside, take your dogs for a walk like I do, and just block out anything and just have that numb moment, because grief can often get you like that, where you don't know what you need to do. Well, you won't do anything constructive while you've got 101 different thoughts going round in your head. So sit down, have a cup of tea, have a rest, have a break. And when people sort of push their energies on you that you need to do it at a pace and do it in any way whatsoever, do not. And I'm not a command issuer, but do not buy into other people's way of doing it, because it is your way of doing it. So just sit there in your thoughts and just remember that if you're in those states, you wouldn't go to anybody else and push them. So don't tolerate being pushed yourself. Just sit there in that gentle moment and just take time out to remember why you're grieving in the first place. Don't put pressure on yourself. And like I was saying earlier there, that moment will move on to the next one.
Well, okay, so there's one thing I really adamantly agree with, and one thing I slightly disagree with, and we're going to talk about what I agree with first, and that is that your perception of the past will change as your perception of self and what it did to you changes as well. When I talked about, and I'm going to give you guys an example because people work really well with examples. I talked about my dad being a very difficult person as well. But the greater perspective that I have gained over the course of time was my dad was actually a war veteran who was pulled from combat and institutionalized for a year and a half because of something that happened to him there. And I do know what it was. My father was older when I was born, so he was a Korean War veteran. And he was with his unit. He hopped over a wall to sew a button on his uniform. And while he was on the other side of that wall, because the sun was blocked by the wall, so he climbed over the wall. It was a fairly substantial wall. While he was sitting over there on a rock sewing a button on his uniform, a Chinese mortar came down on the other side of it and killed his entire unit. He was a sole survivor. So that was, and my father was an academic person and he was prone to anxiety and a couple of other things. And I think he had ADHD. And so that there was a reason behind all of my father's difficulty, that he lived in a time where mental illness, because he was that traumatic event, like literally having everybody that you are went through basic training with slaughtered in front of you because dude had to look over that wall and see everybody dead, and that it was not, it did something profoundly damaging to him. And that is the perspective of how the past can change. The past very much exists. Now, we do not understand the structure of time. It is not linear. It is not, this is behind you. Everything is happening at once, essentially, in what they now believe in physics to be the structure of time. But that what can change is your perspective of what caused the events in the past, what part you played in it, because when we're talking about some relationships that I had in the past, I have to look at the ways in which I wasn't a very healthy person and had to heal myself, and how I was a participant in some of the structure that damaged me because I had not done my own healing work. Now, in fairness to me, a lot of these tools were not available yet. And that when somebody else gives you, because there's a lot of advice on how to deal with grief, is that this is the part I disagree with. Do listen to other people, but understand that if it doesn't fit you, don't try and make it. This is not Cinderella trying on a shoe where you're only going to get the prince if you fit in that particular shoe. If you try a method, if it doesn't sound good to you, if it doesn't work for you, discard it and move on to the next person's method, or continue to develop your own. Because whereas we need a compassionate friend, we need somebody to be understanding, we need somebody to, like, soothe us, we have to become that person when we're on a healing journey. We also need to be able to be our own taskmaster in a compassionate way. In that 72-hour period I'm talking about, it's like, well, this is probably enough and it's making it worse rather than better. Up you go, into the shower, outside, eat something healthy. You have to be that drill sergeant of a person for your own well-being, but it is always done with compassion and understanding, and the idea that I am your best buddy trying to lead you towards wellness, and I'm never going to shame you out of an inconvenient emotion. But sometimes we have to recognize when we're participating in our pain rather than trying to understand it with an eye towards alleviating it. So that was the area where it's like, I get what you're saying, but I'm saying something ever so slightly different. Is
Yeah,
that
maybe in the wrong sort of wording, but essentially, I agree with how you put it. You probably put it in a better context than I did, because I think with experience, what you were saying there, my dad was my dad, and this is what I love about this what we're talking about, because you contacted me at exactly the right time because of what had happened. Now, my dad was not a well, he was a veteran. He considered himself a veteran, and he lost his mother at a very early age. So that had a massive effect on him. That he'd not got sort of mother's love, so he didn't really know how to show that sort of energy, and his emotions were switched off quite early. Then he went into the forces. His dad was a military sergeant major, so he got that sort of seen and not heard background. And
yeah.
my dad's trauma was that he was a recovery mechanic, and he went out to a really bad accident somewhere, and a busload of kids had gone over the side in a bus, and it was, like you say, the We don't need to go into graphic details, but
Exactly. That would be highly traumatizing to see. Yes, the
But
carnage.
as he brought that all out, and then he had to recover the vehicle, and you can imagine what was in that vehicle. What he told me was that the military had taught him to switch his feelings off. So the biggest thing that I've had to deal with in my own personal grief was I was looking to find a positive memory of things, you know, something that I could really look back on and go, that was a great time with my dad. And I really, really struggled until somebody said something that just really flicked a light bulb on. Right, thank all teachers. And I went, I don't understand. Thank all teachers. And I went, but I can't because I'm looking for something pleasant. No, you're not getting this. Think of one thing that you can be thankful for to your dad for. And I went, right, I'm thankful I'm not like him. Well, there you go then. There's something that you've experienced that you can take as a positive out of that. And because I don't switch my emotions off, that I approach my emotions, even though they're very difficult. And the other thing that you picked up on, where you spoke about your dad's possible ADHD,
Mm-hmm.
well, when my dad passed away, I'm 100% convinced, I've not had the diagnosis, that I'm ADHD as well. And what that did when he passed was I was then forced to face up to all of my idiosyncrasies, all of the things that I've sort of bounced off him over the years because it's been a battle. And then when you're in your own moments there, you're just going, oh my God, this makes so much sense. And
Mm-hmm.
then you can look at things in a slightly different way as well. So again, my second message there, to thank him that he's passed, and there's, yes, we're not going to diminish the difficulties and some of the more ill feelings there and some of the more horrible aspects of it, but it's given me the courage to step into my feelings and admit that I don't cope well every day. There's certain situations that don't suit me. There's certain things that I can't handle without help from other people. So it's one of those strange processes that I think society just thinks, right, you have the death, you go into mourning, you do this, you do that, and then eventually you get yourself back up on your feet again and everything, you know, is okay. And I've just gone to people, do you know what? Sometimes it's not okay. And that's okay as well. And this, I'm just so impressed by your terminology about the circle in the drain. If I can take anything from this personally with me, can have the tendency to be ruled by moods. And then I look back and think, well, how did that benefit my dad? Because my dad was moody all of the time, was at war with himself. And I thought, one of the biggest things that I want for my life going forward is that inner peace.
Yeah.
Will I get the inner peace in from where I was, how I was shown, how I was brought up? Absolutely not. So there's another lesson, that I won't get the inner peace that I'm seeking if I act in the same manner as that person that's passed away. But what I am gaining now is a little bit more understanding of why he felt the need to switch his feelings off. But this
Which
is where
caused you,
grief
and
is
I'm
on.
sure damaged you. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is where grief is ongoing, because the bit that I still don't understand is why I was part of that, where the feelings were switched off towards me. But again, it'd be one of those things that I will learn as I go along with it, but I won't get circling the drain over it. So it's a strange old journey we're on.
What you're talking about are people who shut off all feelings because they don't want to be able to experience vulnerability, which they equate with weakness, which they equate with the loss of control. And your father and my father were from a generation of people who really repress their emotions, which is not a good coping strategy because that crap is still there. It leads to addiction, and it leads to all kinds of, and I'll tell you how I figured out my father had ADHD, because like he's been dead for a long time. It is because I do a lot of research on things. I like to read on things. I like to understand things. And I was reading about time blindness, and my father had it. Like he was never on time for anything. And I had wondered for a very long time what was wrong with him. And it would never have occurred to me that he had ADHD until I understood what hyperfocus was, because my father was an academic. I'm sure that's a great big shock with the way that I talk. But honest to goodness, he was an incredibly studious person. He probably would have done well if he had remained in a very cloistered environment his entire life. But he loved to study, and that is hyperfocus, which is again part of ADHD. People having ADHD does not mean they can't concentrate on anything. It means that they have trouble concentrating on more than one thing, and they have trouble concentrating in a way that is productive and ordered. Their executive functioning is damaged. And I learned that all through research. And we're going to talk about what this has to do with grief. Do you know why I'm so good at that? Because my father was an academic. So that the very person that I can look at as being this scary, like everybody was relieved when he died, is also the person that gave me a gift that other people do not possess, that then sets me free from the damage that he caused. And so that within him and his life and my understanding and my looking at that experience to try to figure out what it did, actually showed me the ways in which I was fortunate to have this incredibly scary, dangerous person as my father. There were gifts as well as there were burdens. And that is something in your grief process. We've talked a lot about death, but you guys have to understand it comes along with job loss. It comes along with relationship loss. There is a profound level of grief in long-term relationships that end in divorce, because the entire picture that you painted of what your future is going to look like is gone. And so you did lose a life. It's just not literal. It was the one that you thought you were going to be inhabiting, and that can cause an incredible grief within. Is that in the stage of grief, allow yourself the feelings where you, and sometimes, kind of polish the situation so that you only see the positives. Oh, they were so good. They were so patient. They were this. You will know that you are progressing as you are able to step outside and step outside and step outside, and to understand that there is another perspective on a person that you've lost. One of the most difficult, and I'm not going to share details on this, but it was a difficult spirit guide read that I did, a spirit mediumship read, where the person was not at the stage where they were willing to understand, hey, listen, this person that you lost that meant everything to you had a side about them that you didn't know at all, at all, at all, at all, at all, at all. And you may have viewed them as your rock, but they were actually putting that on as the role that they thought they were supposed to inhabit for you. And they weren't at the stage where that was comfortable for them. But I'm positive it cracked a door to help them start moving past the profound sense of loss. Because if you think you've lost your rock, then you think you're not standing on firm ground any longer. But to recognize that this person was only a rock for that other person. But behind their scenes, it was a chaotic mess as well. And it actually, in the long term, can help somebody. If we're willing to look at someone as having more than one thing going on, it starts lessening the loss. If we're willing to look at a loss as being, yes, I lost that entire picture of the life I thought I was going to live when I got a big, a divorce after 20 years. I'm talking about myself. But it does mean that I can paint a different picture entirely, in which it's an epic journey, not a love story. And that's okay, because that's a little bit more interesting for me. But that first I had to adjust to the idea that the picture I was painting of the future is now gone. That is completely gone. And here's a blank canvas. And first I have to deal with the pain and the loss, and then what am I going to put there? It's like, well, I'm going to put what is important to me and what I can focus on now. And part of that is helping other people cope with things. And the thing that you need to hear, because grief can be so isolating for anybody who's experiencing it, is that as profound as it is, as deep as it is, as painful as it is, you need to understand right at this very moment somebody else is experiencing that same level of pain and perhaps more, that you are never actually alone in it. That you are never actually alone in it. And every emotion that we have is actually temporary. And that's not insulting to the memory or the importance of the loss, but that is the nature of it. And it's the thing you can start telling yourself that will help you get through those heavy moments, those painful moments, those overwhelming moments. And it's what I teach my clients as well, is one of the tools in emotional regulation, which is, this is an emotional regulation issue, is to tell yourself it is a feeling and it will pass. It's not forever. Even though it feels really bad right now, there will be a day where the sun will shine. I will laugh at something, and it won't be a betrayal of that loss. It will be the nature of our ability to persevere. And that if you really are in the blackest areas of your soul, unable to cope, then this is what I told myself over and over again during a life there were a lot of losses, is, well, what do I have to be? I have to be endlessly brave. What do you have to be? I have to be endlessly brave. And I can say it sometimes, endlessly brave. It can, but it is the motivational speech that I give to myself, because it is something that works within me. is to inspire myself towards courage is the easiest thing that I can embrace. Because I have an anxiety disorder, so almost everything I do, I had to embrace the idea that it's like, well, I'm going to be afraid. I'm going to be afraid, and then it'll be over and it'll be okay. And then I'll be proud of myself for getting through something that I was afraid of doing. And as I did that, as I told myself over and over again, all you have to do is choose bravery. It's not brave if you're not a little bit afraid. I became more and more so, and fewer things were frightening to me. And to remember that it will be alleviated over the course of time. And if you're having trouble getting through the period of time where it's overwhelming, reach out or find a way to reach in with that greater perspective of being future you. Remember, if you have access to past you, you have access to future you, the part of you that already knows we're going to get through this, sister or brother or person. We're going to get through this. Pick yourself up, get in that shower, eat some chicken soup, or do whatever it is to take care of you, because you deserve to be healthy, whole, and well when you get to that future. But that the future will come, and that sometimes our battle is just getting through the moment. And if you're having trouble getting through the moment, talk to yourself about this will pass. And the reason people don't like the this will pass is it sounds reductive to an overwhelming and profound level of feeling. It's not to reduce it, it's to put it in the perspective of just hang on through this dark night and the sun will come up. That is the nature of life. As things are born and they die, feelings will come and they will go. And that if you invest hugely in the negative emotions, you can get stuck there. You can be circling the drain. But if you understand this is a natural part of being a feeling being, and if I profoundly loved something, that at the loss of it or the removal of it, of course I'm going to have grief. Of course I'm going to have pain. And that you will eventually get to the point of viewing it as having been a worthwhile endeavor, because it will have taught you so much about who you are and who you wish to be. Rick, you've got a lot of interesting things to say about your own grief process. Is there anything, because you had a difficult relationship with your dad, and that makes sense with what you're talking about. And so you're talking about the exact same type of loss I am, which is the type of loss we don't talk about in society very frequently, which is what when you lose somebody who it really is like, like that is a bit of a, and then we feel guilt. We feel guilt when something is a bit of a relief. Do you have any words to share with people? Because it's far more common than people think. It's far more common. People in long-term care, people who have been caretakers and caregivers, people who have watched somebody battle all the way through cancer, even though they didn't want to lose that person, they feel tremendous guilt that there's a part of me that's relieved. There's a part of me that's relieved. What are your words of advice when that's the truth of the loss, no matter what's causing it?
I think key, and we've touched on this quite in depth really, is not to minimize somebody's feelings and sort of take it down a route that, you know, it's, you shouldn't feel like that and things like that. So what I do, again, I bring in a little bit of humor to this, and I'll say to people, what's your biggest emotion? And I would say during the readings, I do a lot of readings at like traveling shows, things like that, and I sit, and if you're going to get somebody that comes to you with grief, the usual attachment to it is guilt, right? So I sit there and I say, right, so describe to me guilt. And they'll just sit there and they haven't actually got words for it. So I'll say, right, so that guilt, how much would you say that it's part of your mind? How much would you say, oh, how long have you been carrying that around with you? And they'll say, oh, since so-and-so passed, or since the relationship ended, whatever. Right. Now, I portray myself as being quite gullible. So what you've just got there as an emotion, I'm going to offer you a deal, right? I want you to sell me your guilt. And they'll go, pardon? I want you to sell me guilt as a product. I don't understand. Right. But you've just showed me that you're carrying a lot of guilt. And I'm just wondering, but before I offer to part with money, you need to know two things about me. One, I'm tight, so I don't spend money. And two, I need to know what I'm actually purchasing. So you've got like 30 seconds to sell guilt to me. But my condition is, this is my salesman's pitch, I need to know that that guilt will be constructive and will help me in some way moving forward. And they'll sit there and they'll consider it, and people's body language often tells me where they're going. So they'll sit there and they'll go, Guilt. How do I describe guilt? Oh, it's a horrible feeling. Right. So just stop there because you're wasting your time a little bit because you're not selling me on it. So here's the thing. Right. If you can't sell it to me because it's not constructive, because I'm a nice person, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to take it off you for free. Would that be okay? And then there'll be consideration again, and they'll sit there with their hand over the heart, or they'll be going through the head and thinking about this. And I'll say, "What's the problem? I've offered to take off something off you that you've said is a pain." Well, no, I won't want anybody else feeling like that. Right, hang on a minute. I need to process this. Right. So, how old are you? And it's irrelevant how old they are. And I said, if you've met me as a reader, let's say you've had 3 readings with me over the course of the last couple of years that you've met me, 3 readings, an hour and a half, 90 minutes, right? And you have just put me in this place where you have protected me from experiencing something that is negative, something that will not serve me good purpose, something that is not going to be of any use or value to me going forward. And do you understand that? Yes, I understand that. Right. How old are you? And whatever the age is, let's say 52, same as me. So you're 52. So you've put somebody's well-being and well-being ahead of somebody that you've known for 90 minutes. I said, you put me there in that place where you want to steer me away from any harm or any upset or anything like that. Who's been with you from minute 1 right up to this current point? And it's that moment of realization when it goes in that if you can't give it away or sell it, then what the hell are you keeping it for? And it's amazing because what it is, and this is just my perception of therapist, a therapist is designed to break a current state of behavior. So if you've got somebody in that deep state of guilt, right, I'll take it off you. You can sell it to me. And nobody's ever managed to sell it to me yet. But the realization when you sit there that we do experience feelings on a regular basis, but we don't have to, right? We don't have to connect with the feelings. Sometimes it's just sitting in that space and acknowledging the feeling, but letting it pass by and not letting it accumulate. So the ADHD gift, if you like, is being able to process the weaving pathway. So again, because I'm in that state of grief and I've been exposed to that, there's another thing that I'm thankful for, because without that pain, without that being in that moment where I hadn't got any answers, because that was my answer to my mum when she said you needed to ask this, that and the other. And I went, Mum, I've got nothing left. I said, I'm not talking that I'm angry or upset or worried or guilty or frustrated. I have got absolutely nothing. So when all of this stuff came at me that triggered me, I had to learn a new set of skills because I've got nothing left of the old me to cope with it. So when you're in that stage of guilt, ask yourself why you want to carry it. Because the person that's gone to the spirit world are no longer here. That's the sad part of it. But I'm pretty sure the majority of those that come through and connect with you from the spirit world wouldn't want you in this place of guilt and anger and frustration and all of the rest of it, because you're here, right? And your life, whether it's difficult or easy or whatever, is onward going. It's forward progressive. So just a few thoughts there. And that's where we were talking about thought therapy. It's just how it comes in these days, where it goes round the track, and I pick little bits out of it. So sell your guilt, give your guilt away, but don't keep hold of it. That's my advice.
Guilt and shame inhibit growth and understanding. And so examining your feelings for whether or not they are guilt and shame based. Remember, nobody gets a time machine. You can't go back and change your actions, but you can change yourself in the here and the now if you look at the past without shame or judgment, to understand what might have went into some of the decisions, feelings, or actions that you've undertaken. And the reason that you would want to do that is so that your actions and the things that you undertake going forward are changed into a healthier and a more productive fashion. But you won't learn if you are ashamed or ridden, like guilt ridden. And it's not the same thing as not like wanting to make amends or not feeling contrition, or that's not the same thing. You can feel those things without feeling guilt and shame. chances are something went into making you. And that is not to absolve you of all responsibility, but it is to absolve you from the idea that you are solely responsible for some of the damage that that was inflicted upon you. You are responsible for the actions afterwards, but look at responsibility separately from guilt and try to divorce yourself from the idea that shame and guilt do anything other than hold you back. And it is actually, it's a very ego-driven thing because it's making it solely about you and your perspective versus what am I supposed to do with this? And when we talk about learning how to observe our feelings, which is what you're talking about with kind of like, hey, this is going to pass. It doesn't lessen the feeling, but it does lessen the feeling that you have to remedy it in the same way. When you learn to observe your emotions going by, you view it as a way to, how am I supposed to take care of this to get me through this part? But I'm not going to overly invest in that. This is how I feel permanently now, because it can feel that way. When your grief is so overwhelming, it can be very difficult to believe it will ever get any better. And one of the tools in that is to learn to observe the emotion, understanding that, like, hey, listen, the only way this lasts is if I cling to it. But if I learn how to take care of it, I learn how to understand it, and I learn how to not judge myself for having the emotion in the first place, but rather how to respond to it with the appropriate self-care, it will pass that much more quickly. And that is, now, do we want every experience to go shooting by? Everything is temporary. We are temporary. Every single moment is temporary. It will pass. That is not to be, again, it's not nihilistic. It's actually simply embracing the structure of reality, and that it simply is. It is not negative. It is not positive. It simply is. All things are temporary, which means every feeling that you have, the positive, and particularly as it pertains to this discussion, the negative, will flow from you as you move forward, but that you have a lot of power in how you flow forward. Try to do so with compassion for self, understanding of self, accountability for self, which is what I'm talking about when it's like, okay, we've been in for 72 hours, up off the bed, you're going to get blood clots, get moving. That's accountability for your own well-being. Is that you can take responsibility for your own well-being without being ashamed of the emotions that you're having, or the damage, or the grief, or anything else that you are processing as it flows to you and through you and past you. But that if you look for the lessons it can teach you about what you value in this world, including the relationships, including sometimes learning to have compassion for people who are long gone, because that is what eventually happened with my insanely difficult father, is that I had compassion for him after a long period of time, after I had cleared away some of the damage being his daughter had done, is that I looked at this person who had something, and that was not the only thing that happened to him. That's just the most, glaring example of, yes, that would screw you up. He lived in a time where being that traumatized was treated as being shameful and to be locked away and to be hidden. And so he did not have help throughout the course of his life, because we treat mental illness as if it is separate and a choice. And it isn't, it is. It simply is. Just like all things being temporary, sometimes your brain and your emotional system will suffer from something that is akin to an illness, and grief in its way is akin to an illness. And so what you want to look at doing, no matter what is causing your grief, is to go towards the things that will help you heal, but that to not be ashamed of having the emotion or the depth of it, because it is natural, and it means that somebody had a profound influence on your life when you grieve them. And it does not have to be a positive relationship, as in the case of your dad and my dad, but it can still cause a profound level of grief. Hey, Rick, thank you so much for joining me for this discussion, because it's not an easy one. It's genuinely not an easy one. Tell us once more where people can find you for your own services, because Rick has a very slightly different manner than I do. It's part of the reason I have different people on, is go towards the people who vibe for you. And you do these via Zoom and everything, so you're available to people internationally, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, mediumrick007@gmail.com. And I say, if you tune into this, there will be my sort of Facebook pages and things like that. And I echo your sentiments. Don't be on your own with it. That's what I found, that not everybody's an expert, but there's lots of people out there that, if you do open up, don't see grief as a weakness, because I promise it's not. don't be surprised if it does affect your mental health and well-being. Mental health and well-being is a priority to yourself. It is not a weakness. Things can change. And say with me, there's lots of stuff that's been in the background that has been triggered by this grief and loss process. I'm not ashamed by it. And at this stage that I'm at the moment, I'm not in that place where I've got enough compassion to say that I'm okay with what's happened. But on my little timeline there, I'm working towards that, because each and every day that I communicate with people that have had similar experiences and having discussions like this helps me put little steps into place. And sometimes the only thing that you can do is just put one foot in front of the other. You know, your mental health, deal with it in the best way. I'm always very, very passionate about helping people with their mental health struggles, but I know my limitations. So we've spoken about that. Yes, the work that I do is from a personal experience, but when you get to certain levels, you do need those professional people to step in and help structure that. But don't discount anybody that's in your corner as well. So it's kind of like finding that balancing act. And I think my final words that I was just sort of sitting in with that is I look at, we looked about time passing. So when I do a show for people and I go on stage, I give this exercise program, and I say it's only one repetition, right? And all we have to do is when we wake up in the morning is to turn the palm of our hands up like that, right? Turn the palm of our hands up like that. And if we're lucky, you can feel your bedclothes, you can sense the air about you. You can, if you're lucky enough to have somebody with you, you can feel their presence. And realistically, you've got no problems, because the world has gifted you, the universe has gifted you another day to make changes and to alter your thought pattern and the way that things are happening and around you. If you get to the point where you wake up one morning and you do your exercise program and you feel wooden soil above you, then you've got a problem. But if you consider that, you haven't got a problem, because you're no longer here to fight that battle. So please, please remember that nobody can make you feel anything. It's the way that you're reacting to the stimulus that is presented around you. So my thought for you all, guys, and I'll just put this out, is just peace. Just peace of spirit, peace of mind. Just take your time. Don't be rushed by this swipe world. And that is where I will say my gratitude and thanks to you, Alane, for having me on again, because it's been an amazing experience once again. And I've learned a lot from you. Thank you.
Well, thank you for being here, Rick. Rick is in another country, so we have a little bit of like challenge around scheduling this, but you were very kind to make this time for me and to help us with this. Guys, remember, in the idea of grief is something has ended, and whether it's a life or whether it's a relationship or whether it's a job or whether it's a dream, is the alchemy of energy teaches us that death will always yield new life. And that even you have to go through this processing and this examining period of the feelings that the loss has caused you, that it informs how you will look at the things that you have going forward. And if you learn to embrace the idea that the temporary quality of everything in our life is actually positive and it makes things more beautiful and more vibrant, the fact that we don't really keep anything is actually a beautiful concept in how we should value everything that comes to us. And that if you are experiencing a profound level of grief, to remember that that comes from a profound level of feeling, and that we are very fortunate indeed when our feelings are the things that we are able to focus on rather than our survival. And that if we aren't, when we're in survival mode, which is what, you know, soldiers are taught to inhabit, shut off your feelings, that we don't have the time to entertain the depth and the beauty of the feelings that come to us because of our connections. And that's what grief really is it is in a profound and deep feeling within, and that to try and embrace it as something that is helping you understand your ability to connect, your ability to love, and sometimes your grief and your loss will be teaching you why you struggle with that, as in the case of Rick and myself. This has been Logical Magic, examining esoterica. Thank you for joining me for the great big grief discussion. We do nothing but the fun topics here, but sincerely, I have some lovely people who come back and help me with it, and Rick Paul is one of them. He is somebody who I really respect his ethics on things. And it's great to be, and it's not that I've had a bunch of people on that I don't. It's just that I'm telling you that, particularly in spirit mediumship, it's very important to go towards people that you believe they are doing it for the right reasons. And I believe Rick is. So I would recommend his services because I know he's coming from the right place on it in connecting. Take care, be well, live magically, and know that you contain the power to heal.